The CEO of German pharmaceutical company BioNTech says he thinks Europe will reach herd immunity in 3 to 4 months. That's one of 3 headlines we're following for you tonight. The threshold of herd immunity is still a debate, but experts agree it is above 70%. BioNTech's leader says Europe could reach that by August at the latest. Now, he did caution, you should know, herd immunity wouldn't include children initially. Of course, there's no vaccine for anyone 15 or younger right now. BioNTech developed the first COVID-19 vaccine with its U.S. partner Pfizer, which is available, as you know, to anybody 16 or older. A new CDC study finds Pfizer and Moderna vaccines reduce the rate of hospitalization among older adults by 94%. That's anyone at least 65 years old in the United States. They compared the odds of vaccination among those who had tested positive for COVID-19 versus those who had tested negative. And they found those who were fully vaccinated with either vaccine were 94% less likely to have to go to the hospital when compared to those who did not get the vaccination. Uber and Walgreens are teaming up to help more people get the shot. The rideshare company and the pharmacy giant joining forces to get people who don't have a car or live near a pharmacy vaccinated. So Uber's going to offer free rides to Walgreens stores and clinics for those who book an appointment and live in underserved parts of our country. The pilot program is starting here in Atlanta, as well as Chicago, Houston, and El Paso.